How much of your suffering today, the anxiety, the emptiness, the patterns in your relationships, could be traced back to your childhood? What if the pain you carry isn't just yours, but a legacy passed on in silence, wrapped in love, and buried under years of being strong? Dr. Gabor Maté, one of the most respected voices in trauma and human development, says this without hesitation. The child is very often wounded by what the parent never intended. And yet, until you dare to see what really happened between you and your mother, not the version you tell others or even yourself, but the felt truth of it, healing remains incomplete. Because no matter how much therapy you do, how many books you read, there's a place inside you that still waits for permission to grieve, to feel, to be free. This is not about blame, it's about liberation. In this video, we're going to walk gently but honestly into one of the most sacred and sensitive territories of human life, the bond between mother and child. Not the fantasy, the real one, the one your nervous system remembers, even if your mind has forgotten. Let's begin. There are wounds that bleed, and there are wounds that whisper. The second kind is more dangerous because you spend your whole life pretending they're not there. Many adults today, strong, capable, high-functioning, carry a silent ache inside. They don't always call it trauma. Sometimes it looks like burnout, or people-pleasing, or a chronic tightness in the chest they can't explain. They say things like, "I had a good childhood. My mother did her best. There was food on the table and a roof over our heads." And all of that may be true. But what Gabor Maté reminds us is this: trauma is not what happened to you. It's what happened inside you. And often, what happened inside was that you had to suppress your emotions, to keep the peace, to stay close to someone who didn't know how to be emotionally present. When a mother is anxious, depressed, emotionally unavailable, or consumed by her own pain, the child adapts. They become the easy one, the helper, the invisible one, the high achiever, whatever it takes to feel safe and stay loved. But the cost is immense. They lose touch with themselves. And when we lose that connection, when we silence our own needs, feelings, and truth, the body begins to speak for us, in the form of tension, in the form of illness, in the form of self-sabotage or the inability to feel joy. Silence becomes sickness, not overnight, but slowly, quietly, until one day it's all you know. The hardest part? You might not even realize it started with her. You didn't know it back then. How could you? You were just a child, needing love, protection, presence, and you adapted. That's what children do to survive. The most insidious thing about childhood wounding is that it hides behind what we called normal. You grew up thinking, this is just how it is. Maybe your mother was overworked, constantly anxious, emotionally volatile, or just emotionally absent. Maybe she shared too much with you, confided in you like a partner instead of parenting you like a child. Maybe she was loving, but conditional, warm one moment, cold the next. And you learned to read her moods like weather patterns, always, adjusting yourself to stay in her favor. None of it looked like abuse. It looked like life. It looked like home. It looked like normal. But it wasn't. What you were calling normal was actually a high-functioning survival state, a nervous system on constant alert, a heart that never fully relaxed, a child who had to abandon parts of themselves just to stay connected. Gabor Maté speaks to this with sharp clarity. Children don't get traumatized because they're hurt. They get traumatized because they're alone with the hurt. Think about that. How many times did you feel alone with your pain, even when your mother was right there in the room? How many tears were swallowed just to keep the peace? When survival becomes your baseline, you don't recognize the cost until years later, when your relationships feel unsatisfying, when you can't stop working, fixing, achieving, because rest feels unsafe, when you feel responsible for everyone's feelings but your own. This is not your fault, but it is your inheritance. And to heal, you'll need to question what you once called normal and finally see it for what it was. An act of love, yes, but also an act of survival. Your body remembers what your mind learned to forget. That's one of the central teachings of Dr. Gabor Maté, a physician who spent decades working with addiction, chronic illness, and mental health. What he discovered was simple but revolutionary. Trauma isn't just stored in your memories. It's stored in your nervous system, in your immune system, in your cells. It shapes your posture, your breathing, the way your stomach tightens before a conversation, the way you clench your jaw when you're trying to stay calm, the way you feel exhausted. Not just tired, but soul-weary after being around certain people, especially family. Maté saw a clear pattern. Behind autoimmune disease, chronics, fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, even cancer, there was often a childhood marked by emotional suppression. Not always abuse, but disconnection. Disconnection from the self. He says, when we have to choose between attachment and authenticity, a child will always choose attachment. In other words, if you had to abandon your own emotions to keep the bond with your mother, you did. And now, decades later, your body still carries that adaptation. As illness, as anxiety, as addiction, as a deep sense of disconnection from who you truly are. You might be successful. You might be admired. You might even be the one others come to for help. But inside, you feel like something is off, like there's a version of you that never got to exist, because survival became your personality. This is not about blaming your mother. It's about understanding that what you couldn't process emotionally as a child, your body had to carry for you, and it still does, until you begin to feel what was never felt. Speak what was never spoken, and see, with clarity and compassion, the origins of your pain. This may be the hardest truth to accept. A mother can love you, and still wound you. Love isn't the same as presence. It isn't the same as safety. It isn't the same as being seen, heard, and emotionally held. Maybe your mother told you she loved you every day. Maybe she worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. Maybe she sacrificed everything for you, and still, maybe she criticized you when you were most vulnerable, dismissed your feelings as drama, compared you to others, or leaned on you emotionally when you needed someone to lean on. When you're a child, you don't question whether you're being loved in a healthy way. You just absorb everything. Her anxiety becomes yours. Her rage, her fears, her sadness, they settle in your bones like inherited weather. You learn not to cry, not to ask, not to need. Because every time you did, the response was unpredictable or painful, and so you shrink. You become accommodating, grateful for scraps of warmth while swallowing the sharpness that came with them. Gabor Maté makes an essential distinction here. The wound is not caused by the lack of love, but by the lack of attunement. Attunement is when your parent truly sees you, not just physically but emotionally, when they notice your distress and respond with sensitivity, without shame, without making it about them, without turning away. Many mothers simply didn't know how to do this, not because they were evil or cruel, but because they were never attuned to themselves. They carried their own unhealed pain and passed it on, wrapped in care, wrapped in duty, wrapped in phrases like, "I just want what's best for you." But deep down, you knew. What they wanted wasn't always what you needed. So you learned to perform, to hide the messier parts of yourself, to be the version of you that made her feel okay, and in doing so, you lost access to your wholeness. Healing begins when we stop confusing love with emotional safety. They don't always come together, but they must if we are to become whole. You grew up. You took on responsibilities, a job, maybe a family of your own. You became who you needed to be. But the truth is, the child you once were never disappeared. They live inside you, not as a memory, but as a voice, a set of reactions, a part of your nervous system that still doesn't feel safe, still longs to be held, still flinches at rejection or silence. You might think, that's in the past, I've moved on. But have you? Why do you feel panic when someone pulls away from you emotionally? Why do you over-explain yourself when you sense someone is upset? Why do you feel guilty for resting, or saying no, or expressing anger? These are not the habits of your adult self. They are the coping mechanisms of the child, who didn't feel safe enough to exist as they truly were, and they show up now, in your career, in your parenting, in your closest relationships. That child never had closure. They didn't get to cry freely, ask big questions, or say, "Mom, I'm scared. Mom, I feel invisible. Mom, can you see me? Not who you need me to be, but me." Instead, they learned to adapt, to be the good girl, the strong one, the quiet one, the smart one, the peacekeeper. Each adaptation was a brilliant survival strategy. But now, as an adult, those strategies might be strangling you, keeping you from authenticity, keeping you from joy. Gabor Maté reminds us, healing doesn't mean going back to who you were before. It means becoming who you really are, beneath the coping, beneath the conditioning. To do that, you must return to that child within, not to stay stuck there, but to finally bring them the compassion they never received. Not judgment, not analysis, just presence. To sit with their fear, to witness their grief, to give them what your mother, for whatever reason, couldn't give you, because that child is still waiting, and they'll keep showing up in your life through triggers, emotional reactions, and painful patterns until you stop running and start listening. You learned early on that being you wasn't always safe. Maybe it was your sensitivity, your anger, your neediness, your creativity, your truth. Some part of you, raw, real, essential, wasn't welcome in the space between you and your mother. So you tucked it away, and in its place you built something else, a version of yourself that was more acceptable, more digestible, more lovable. That's what psychologists call the false self, and here's the tragedy. It often works. You become the overachiever, the caretaker, the funny one, the invisible one, the one who never complains, never asks too much, never makes anyone uncomfortable. People admire you, you fit in, you succeed. But inside, something is off. A quiet ache, a sense of fraudulence, a fear that if you ever stopped performing, you might disappear. Gabor Maté puts it plainly. The false self is the self we created to survive, not to live. And while it may have protected you in childhood, now it comes at a steep cost. You don't know what you want. You don't know how you feel. You say yes when you mean no. You confuse love with duty. You chase connection but feel alone even when you're with others. Why? Because connection built on a false self can never truly satisfy. It's always conditional, always dependent on how well you maintain the mask. So the question becomes, who did you have to become in order to feel loved? And even deeper, what part of you had to be hidden to keep that love? The false self isn't your enemy. It was your lifeline. It deserves gratitude. But now, in this chapter of your life, you're allowed to lay it down, piece by piece, pattern by pattern. You're allowed to reclaim the parts of you that were silenced, shamed, or ignored. Because your healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world, and maybe your mother told you who you had to be. There's a reason it's so hard to look at our mothers with honest eyes. Not just eyes of gratitude, not just eyes of love, but truthful eyes. Because to do so feels like betrayal. It feels like disloyalty to the woman who gave you life. The one who held you, fed you, stayed up through the night when you were sick. The one who tried her best. And yet, something inside you knows there was more to the story. A subtle pain, a feeling of not being enough, a wound you still carry, even if you can't quite name it. This is what family systems theorists call invisible loyalty, a deep, unconscious commitment to protect the parent, even at the cost of your own truth. You defend her. You minimize the pain. You say, "She had a hard life. She didn't know better. She did everything for us." And all of that may be true. But here's the deeper truth. Protecting your mother's image is not the same as protecting your inner child. One keeps the peace. The other sets you free. Gabor Maté says, "When we idealize our parents, we're not honoring them. We're abandoning ourselves." Let that sink in. You don't have to hate your mother to heal, but you do have to stop protecting her from your truth. You have to allow space for grief, not just over what happened, but over what didn't happen, the safety that never arrived, the attunement that never came, the version of childhood that you should have had, but didn't. And that's not bitterness, it's honesty. It's the doorway to emotional maturity, because when you can hold both realities, she loved me and she hurt me, something remarkable happens. You become whole. You no longer have to split yourself in two. You no longer have to choose between loyalty to her and loyalty to your truth. You can honor the woman who gave you life, and still mourn the mother you needed but never had. That's not betrayal. That's liberation. There are emotions we've been taught to fear, to repress, to hide even from ourselves, especially when they're directed towards someone we were supposed to only love. Someone like our mother. But here's the truth. Healing asks you to feel everything, not just the polite emotions. Anger, guilt, sadness, they're not signs of immaturity. They're the natural, intelligent responses to a childhood where your emotional reality wasn't met, mirrored, or respected. But as children, we couldn't risk feeling those things. Anger felt dangerous. It might lead to rejection. Sadness felt overwhelming. There was no one to hold it with us. Guilt became our shield. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I was too much. So we buried those feelings deep, under smiles, under perfectionism, under caretaking. And now, as adults, those buried feelings become symptoms: exhaustion, anxiety, depression, people-pleasing, emptiness. Gabor Maté says it clearly. The repression of anger and the suppression of authentic emotion are major causes of illness. That doesn't mean we need to rage at our mothers, but it does mean we need to give ourselves permission to feel what we couldn't feel back then, in a safe, conscious, compassionate way. It's okay to be angry that she didn't protect you. It's okay to feel sad for the parts of yourself you had to hide. It's okay to feel guilty for thinking these things, but not let that guilt dictate your life. You are not ungrateful. You are not heartless. You are not disrespectful. You are a human being who is finally learning to tell the truth, emotionally, not just intellectually. And the truth is, until you let these feelings move through you, they'll keep shaping your life from the shadows. Feel it all, because emotions are not the enemy. Repression is. A common fear arises when we begin to heal from our childhood wounds. If I really face this, will I lose her? The fear is valid. Because when your entire identity has been built around keeping the peace, pleasing, staying close, even at the cost of your truth, stepping into authenticity feels like betrayal. But here's the paradox. You can break the cycle without breaking the bond. Not all relationships survive deep healing, but many transform. Not because the other person changes, but because you do. And transformation begins when you stop relating to your mother as a child seeking approval, and start relating to her as an adult with healthy boundaries, emotional awareness, and self-respect. That might mean having hard conversations, or saying no, or choosing not to engage in certain dynamics. It might mean grieving the mother she couldn't be, even if she's still alive. You don't need to cut her off to reclaim yourself, but you do need to stop abandoning yourself to preserve the illusion of closeness. Gabor Maté puts it like this: we're not here to blame our parents. We're here to understand how their pain became ours, and to stop passing it on. Because the truth is, the cycle continues until someone says, "It ends with me." You may never get the apology. You may never get the emotional depth you longed for from her, but you can still choose to live a different story. You can become the parent to your inner child that she couldn't be for you. You can create emotional safety, first within yourself, and then in your relationships. You can learn to love from wholeness, not from woundedness. And, perhaps, over time, your mother might begin to relate to this new version of you, or she won't. Either way, your freedom does not depend on her change. It depends on your willingness to stop negotiating your truth in exchange for love. Because real love, adult love, doesn't require that you stay small. We spend years, sometimes decades, building lives around a wound we don't even know we're protecting. We become experts at avoiding it, covering it with success, distracting ourselves with relationships, work, caregiving, even spirituality. We defend the wound with stories like, "She did her best. It wasn't that bad. I turned out fine." But behind those words, there's often a quiet fear. If I touch this pain, will I fall apart? Will I become bitter, ungrateful, unlovable? So we keep protecting the wound, as if it's a fragile thing, but it's not. What's fragile is the false self built around it. What's fragile is the illusion that you had to be someone else to be loved. The wound itself? It's just a part of your story waiting to be seen. Not to define you, but to release you. Gabor Maté says, "The moment we stop resisting what is and begin to feel it fully, healing becomes inevitable." That's the turning point. When you stop running. When you sit with what hurts, not to fix it, but to witness it, with compassion, with presence, with truth. You begin to realize you are not broken, you were wounded, and now you are healing. You don't need permission to stop protecting the wound. You don't need your mother's agreement or the family's understanding. You just need your own courage to feel what's real and to stop pretending that survival is enough. Because it isn't. You deserve more than survival. You deserve freedom, wholeness, peace, and it begins the moment you say, "I'm ready to stop protecting the pain and start living beyond it."